All right, welcome back to our study on the book of 1 Corinthians. This is session 17. We're talking about what is yours continued. And we're going to get on through verses 18 here in chapter 3 and get on into chapter 4. So at the end of our previous session, we read that long passage in Acts 17. And I told you that after we read that, when we came back, that we would be pulling a couple of verses out of that. We'd be focusing on those verses. So here's what I want to do. And let me get past this because we did read that already. So the first one is Acts 17:25. Neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things. So I do want to make some comments about this. And by the way, that all things, that, remember, is in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 at the end of verse 21 and at the end of verse 22. Paul repeats that. But you have to understand that when we're talking about here in Acts, Paul is not talking to saved people. He's talking to unsaved people about the unknown God. Remember, they don't know who the God is. So we're going to make a distinction about that, but I just want you to get that in your mind. So here in Acts 17, though, Paul is saying that the only reason in him, well, okay, here he says he giveth to all life and breath and all things. Aseity is about God's eternal existence. He is that being. Look, there's a whole lot to this, and I'm just trying to decide how much to talk about here. But you understand that we are, okay, we say, look, there are inanimate objects, rocks. And then you have plants. And then you have animals. And then you have man. And then you have supernatural. We're talking about the angelic realm. And then you have God. And we're not, I mean, this is kind of the pecking order of that. But you know what? People refer to this, they call God the supreme being. I'll talk about this in more detail in the bare bones thing, but look, are we beings? We are. And here's the point. The very fact that you are a being is because there is a God. You say, well, of course, because if he didn't create anything, we wouldn't be here. That's true. That's true. But you understand that even once you're here, you only continue because you are in the mind of God. By him, he created all things, and by him all things consist. That's what Colossians says. The only reason that things continue is because, remember back in I want to say it was the late 60s or early 70s, there was a group that declared God is dead. Well, you say, and really and truly, I was very offended about that back then because I thought they were saying there is no God. What they were saying is the culture in America had begun to treat, live in such a way like God is dead. That's the way they began to live. And I think that's the point they were really trying to make. But here's the thing. If God ever died, he cannot, but if he ever died, everything would cease to exist in a moment. Now, I'm not trying to relegate this to a movie, but I'll tell you what it'd be like. It'd be like Thanos snapping that glove. Okay, no one here knows what that's about. Okay, so it would just be, it wouldn't be half of the population, it would be everything would cease to exist. Nothing can fall out of God's mind. Thank God for that. Because that is the only reason that things continue. People think, oh, well, you know what, doesn't matter about God anymore because once we're here, we're just doing our thing. No, you don't understand. I'm going to give you an equivalent to this. I'm not saying that's what this is, but have you ever had a dream and there's people in your dream and you might know some of those people? And I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I'm dreaming about people and I have no clue where I am. I mean, I can't identify it. It's not at my house or any of my friends' house. I don't have any idea. But I had a dream the other night where I'm in a room and there's people in this room and there's someone over here and they're very tore up about this issue. And I went over and sat down beside them and I said, what if I could show you how to be free from this? And they went, oh, yes. And I said, okay. And then I woke up. So I guess they're still in misery. The point is, I don't know where that was, and I don't know who that person was that I was talking to. Now, that's about all I really remember about that. But here's the thing. As soon as I woke up, that was gone. That was gone. So I'm not saying we're living in a dream. That's not the metaphor I'm trying to use here, or the analogy I'm trying to use. But I am saying that if you ever were not in the, whatever is not in the mind of God is going to be like waking up. That reality would cease in a moment. And so I just want you to understand. And by the way, I know that sounds simplistic, but that's a little bit of a window into part of what divine aseity is about. That God, it's not just that He is self-existent, but that everything that exists depends on Him. And that is to the nth degree. And of course, I think you can fill in the blank on all that. But look, the fact that you have a circulatory system, the fact that your lungs continue to breathe when you go to sleep at night, your heart continues to beat. How is all that? You say, well, that's chemicals and fire. And look, you have to understand, we may know a lot about stuff, but we don't know stuff. So a professor of mathematics at Oxford University, Dr. John Lennox, was debating Richard Dawkins on a point, and he was asking him to explain God being eternally pre-existent. And what he was going to say is, if you can't explain that, then it's not, it can't be true. And Dr. Lennox looked at him and said, what is gravity? And he went, well, I mean, it's the force that went about. He said, no, that's how it works. What is it? And so finally, after a little bit, he goes, well, we don't really know what that is. He said, what is consciousness? And he goes, well, that's when you're self-aware. He said, no, that's how it works. What is it? What is it? And then he asked him again. He said, what is energy? And he said, well, that's the means by which. He said, yeah, that's what it does. But what is it? And he goes, well, we just don't know. He said, then I guess they're not real. See, the whole idea is, if you think, because if you ever say, well, I don't know, then they play gotcha, right? But the thing is, even a guy that thinks science can answer all the questions, he doesn't know the answers either. So is there a consciousness? Is there gravity? Do those things exist? Well, absolutely they do. And I appreciated the point that he was making there. But I want to pull this second verse in right here. And it says, and in Him we live and move and have our being. And who is Paul talking to here? Saved people or lost people? He's talking to lost people. In Him we live and move. In other words, the very fact that someone says, I'd like to see a proof for God. You're here, aren't you? They were talking about this issue of being, and actually they're going to pull it back around to God, which is part of aseity. And the counterpart was to say, the only being is God. He said the only being is God. Everybody else is not being, they're becoming. So he's saying, are you smarter than you were before? Do you have more life experience to draw on than before? Are you able to figure, is any of that happening? He said, then you're becoming. That was his point. Now, I'm not defending it. I'm just saying, he was saying, you are becoming, which is a very interesting fact if you think that there's a verse that says, it doth not yet appear what we shall be. Well, that kind of makes you think, okay, so we're going to become something. I know what it is we're going to become. Do you know what it is we're going to become? In fact, you were predestinated for this, to be conformed to the image of God's Son. You're predestinated to that. And once that happens, then I guess you are being and no longer becoming. Oh boy, I'm just dying to talk about something about that. But anyway, I know that seems a little odd. Anyway, all right, I'm not going to do any more because then I'll get too far into it. Paul is not saying here that God is manipulating anybody's will to make them do the things that they do. So God is not, if a man, commits a crime or some heinous act, God's not the one that did that. That's a choice that he has made. But the fact that there is a future, to take you back to 1 Corinthians 3 just for a moment, all things are yours. Paul, Apollos, Cephas, life, death, things present, things to come. Things to come, that's the future, right? The only reason there is a future is because God has decided there is a future to be had. When time runs out on anything, then that is the end of that. There is no more future of that. So all of these things that you do, and this is where I'm trying to explain this and take it back, that if you enjoy looking at a sunset, if you see a rainbow in the sky, if you walk through snow, if you like the beach and you would walk in shallow water along the sand of a beach and feel it on your feet, if you like the majestic beauty of the mountains, if there's any of those things, those things are only there because God is. That is the sense in which what Paul can give you this whole list of things and say, this world or life or death or things present or things to come, all of those things, you know what? It's only because in Him we live and move and have our being. And that goes for lost people too. The only reason you're here is because there is a God. And all the things that you would enjoy or do, and by the way, he's not saying to the Corinthians that everything is going to be rosy for you and that you're going to enjoy everything. Romans 8:28 is in the Bible too. That even those sufferings are meant to produce something for you. But by the way, you have to be a child of God to get that one. The world can't get that one. But it is true that in Him we live and move and have our being. It is true that life, breath, and all things are given to us because there is a God. What is Paul doing here? He's trying to tell them about the only God that matters. So what language would he use to do that? See, you don't realize that it's this unknown God that you guys don't know about, but the only reason you're here and you have life and breath in your body is because of Him. That's what he's doing. And he's going to say, and you know what? He has given you life and breath and all things. You say, are they supposed to look around at that and say, man, we may not know particularly about this God, but it's because of God that this gets done. Well, yeah, that's a starting point. And then he's going to turn around, and that's verse 25, and then in 28 he's going to turn around and say, in Him we live and move and have our being. So the fact that you've got oxygen that keeps you alive and that plants produce it, that's all part of the genius of the God that they did not know about. All of those things were really given in that way. So if a man wants to, you say, yeah, but what about this? What about a guy invents air conditioning? Now, I love air conditioning. I'm really glad I wasn't born back in the 1500s and lived in West Texas, because I don't know how you'd keep cool. Or the 50s. Or the 50s. That's true. That's true. But you know what? The only way you can invent air conditioning is because God put principles of physics into place that allow a man to be able to identify what things are going on and how to be able to build something that will utilize those principles to cool the air. I mean, we've talked about this too. You can plow the field and you can plant the seed and you can throw water on it, but it's the one who causes that seed to germinate and grow. That's where the real miracle happens, right there. So all of this is because of him. So I want you to just stop for a moment and think about this. Don't think about, oh, that's Bible study. Just think about it this way. You know, all those things in my life, all those things that work in this world, all these things that, you know what? That's because of him. And every day that I see these things, I'm reminded it is because he is that these things can be. Without him, there is none. Okay. So back to 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18. That's 21. Sorry, we'll just read it because I'm just bringing us back to where we were. Therefore, let no man glory in men, for all things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, those are apostles, or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, all are yours, all of that. And by the way, if he says to those folks in Acts that he has given you life, breath, and all things, how much more do you think he has given? The end of the first section. You remember what I told you? The first section was going to be how we think about ourselves. And then I said the second session is going to be how we think about others. And both of those sections start with this third person singular. Let no chapter 4, verse 1. Let a man so account of us as the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. So first thing he does is think about you from this standpoint. And now Paul is going to say, think about us. Now, the way I see this is in the application, this is about the apostles that God gave the early church and the other gifts that he gave to them for their own edification. In my way of thinking, I'm not included in this. I think this is specific. And he's going to make a comment about that. So I do think in this first part, the ministers of Christ, he's talking about the apostles and the prophets. By the way, I don't, you know, when I'm doing, are you watching the Ephesians things that I'm taping at my desk? So I just say this so that you all get this. When you're talking about the dispensation of Gentile grace, you have this thing where Paul talks about the apostles and prophets. And the order of that tells you that it's talking about those that were given at the beginning of the dispensation of grace. When you're talking about the Old Testament, the order is prophets and apostles. Why? Because in Israel's program, the prophets came first, and then the apostles don't show up until the time of the Lord. Do you have prophets before the Lord shows up? Well, yeah, absolutely. Starting over there with Isaiah and coming on through all those prophets to Zechariah. Yeah, so the prophets come first and the apostles. But when you're reading in the Bible and you see apostles and prophets, guess what? When Paul lists how those were given, he actually says, when he talks about God giving it, he said first apostles, secondarily prophets, and then he goes on down the line. So this is the dispensation of Gentile grace appellative. This is for Israel's program, and it does prophets first. Now, I didn't show you this in the book of Ephesians, but I do, and I thought maybe I should look that up and show it to you, and I'm not going to be able to turn to it because it'll take too long for me to find it. But you know what? You say, but Brother Mike, I found an exception to that. I found an exception to that over in the book of Revelation. And if I just tell you about it, the next time I'm here, I'll take a minute before we get started, and I'll show you the verse and explain it. But over in Revelation, it says apostles and prophets. But I'm going to get myself in a tangle. Okay. So you say, so isn't that an exception? No. Where is John caught up to when he sees the events of Revelation? Caught up to the day of the Lord, right? He's caught into the future to see this. And when he is standing up there and he's looking at this retinue in heaven, it says something like this. Now, this is going to be not exactly right, but if you look this up, you'll see what it is. But he says something about ministers or servants or something like that. And then he says, and apostles and prophets. He's talking about people in this great throng that he's looking at, and then he lists them. And when he lists them like that, and he said, if you said, well, apostles and prophets, that would be those in the dispensation of grace. Yeah, because those were the guys that were given at the beginning of the dispensation of grace. Where do you think they are now? These would be the thanks for that, Rick. So these would be the members of the body of Christ. When John is looking at the events in Revelation, where is that on the timeline? Daniel's 70th week, right? Tribulation. Well, let me ask you, if you're in the tribulation, where's the apostles and prophets that came in at the start of the dispensation of grace? They're up there, aren't they? They'd be part of the crowd up there. So what is Paul doing? He's accurate. He's saying, hey, these ministers, these servants, I see apostles and prophets. You say, well, wait a minute, apostles and prophets, he's looking at people that were from that. Yeah, where do you think they are? Absolutely. So this holds true every time. Because if you're not careful and again, I don't remember how this verse starts, but I'll show it to you next time. But when you look at that, you think this is describing this. It's not. It's a list that continues on. He's not coming back and describing anything. If you see that verse, then think what I just said and you'll go, oh, well, look at that. And you'll see it. And if you don't look it up between now and then, I'll show it to you next time. Okay. So, here's the second session. So let a man account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Now, this is about, when I say how we're supposed to regard others, specifically how we're supposed to regard ministers, or how the Corinthians were supposed to regard ministers. And there's a reason for that, because only God really knows what's in their heart. Now, you have to remember, Paul is not the favorite of many of the Corinthians. They're critical of Paul, and they don't like some of the things that Paul is saying. So as a result, they make statements about Paul and his ministry. And they're really into this. Let's assess everybody and see what we think. Let's give Paul 4 stars, and we'll give Apollos 4.5 stars, and we'll do something kind of like that. So here's what Paul's going to do. He's going to respond to that. Verse 3. But with me it's a very small thing that I should be judged of you, or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not my own self. For I know nothing by myself, yet am I not hereby justified, but he that judgeth me is the Lord. Now, what is Paul saying when he says this? When he says, it's a very small thing that I should be judged of you. Because, first of all, do they know what's really going on in Paul's heart? Do they know everything Paul is doing? Why? Just a moment. But when he does this, let me see where we are here. So that's verses 3 and 4. Okay, so let's look at verse 5. Therefore, in view of that, judge nothing before the time until the Lord come. Wait, what's the time? Judge nothing before the time. What do you think the time is? That's the judgment seat of Christ. Okay? Don't judge anything before the time until the Lord come, who both will bring to light. So Paul is saying, hey, there's a whole lot more going on than just what you see. There will come a day when God will bring to light the hidden things of darkness. He's saying the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. He understands where all of that is. So when he says, and then at that judgment, every man will have praise of God. I'm going to bring this in Romans 14:4. Actually, I guess I skipped this one and I didn't mean to. So, and these things, brethren, I have in a figure transferred to myself and Apollos for your sakes, that you might learn in us not to think of men above that which is written, that no one of you be puffed up for one against another. When he says above that which is written, written where? In the Bible, in the Word of God. Does the Bible ever say anything about the hearts of men, the intents of their heart, and all of that kind of business? Of course it does. He says, don't think Paul have authority as the apostle to the Gentiles? And to do that, was he asking people to look at him above that which was written? No, but in accordance with what was written. Those that faithfully labor in the word and in the work of the ministry, are they worthy of honor? The Bible says they are. But don't think of them above that which is written. You understand? There's a proper way to look. But this is the Corinthians' failure. They weren't really looking at it the way they were supposed to. They were just looking at men, and they were kind of judging Paul and thinking, no, he's that, I don't agree with that. I don't like, and then they're looking at someone else that may tell them what they want to hear, and I kind of like that. So that's the way the Corinthians were dealing with that. Okay, now let's take a look at the next verse that I skipped. Now, how did I get that there? I mean, I am looking carefully at my notes, and I don't think, you know what, I guess I got too far. I meant to read Romans 14:4, and I guess I didn't have it in the PowerPoint. Let me read it now. Because remember, they're the one that are judging Paul, and they're, boy, we don't really like what he's having to say. And here's what he says, Romans 14:4. Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth. Man, I think that gets violated every day. So, in my life, here's what I know. I just have to report to one. That's the only one. And as long as I can do that, and do that to the best of my ability with a clear conscience, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And you say, well, what if, because we always say this, someone says, well, look, if you don't amend this or you don't quit talking about that, then you know what? Nobody's going to come. That's not really the issue. The issue is the truth, right? But see, the world looks at it and says, if you're going to be successful, you got to, see, they have a worldly way of measuring that success. But God has a different way. You know what His way is? To be a faithful steward of the mysteries of God. We read that a moment ago. That's the measure of success with God. Not I mean, I'm always glad when people find out about and follow and want to participate. I'm always glad for that. That's not the measure of our success. By the way, if anything good happens out of that, guess who gets the glory for that? The Lord does. That's not me being humble, that's me being biblical. Because I understand I didn't invent any of the doctrine. I didn't come up with it. I don't make it true. I don't make it work. All of that is in the hand of God. If I learned it, I want you to know about it and I want to teach it, but let's just all give God the glory for that because that's really the one that deserves it, right? And so Paul is going to say that about his own ministry as well. And so now Revelation 4:11, we'll pick this one up, and I'm sorry, I got to turn over there in my notes because I kind of got ahead of myself because I'd skipped that in the PowerPoint. Oh. He's the only one like that. The atheist will argue with that and say, oh, there's an infinite number of things that have no beginning and no end. And they want to call them beings, but they're not beings. But they're going to say there's an infinite number of those. And they would say consciousness is one of those. It didn't have a beginning. It's always been. And the number 2, the number 4. They would say those have always been. No matter what language you may say them in, they have always been. But you say, well, then is there an infinite number of things along with God that is self-existing? No, because those things come out of the mind of God. Those things are not something separate from God. They only exist because of God. Now, it's the only reason math works is because God put those principles into motion. So I think that's kind of a straw man argument to think that you can find a concept or a thought that you think is always been there, but if it's always been there, then it had to come from a mind. You understand, you can't have consciousness without a mind. Well, the only mind was God's. So guess what? That's out of the mind of God.
G'day everyone. Here's
So
a quick setup on how I use
and I started to mention this in the last session, so I think I'll do it here. And that is Socrates had the idea, and
so
although he had some things right,
touch
he had some things wrong,
I've got a
he used to
joystick
look
chop
at that
here,
and he used
which
to
is
say, look,
basically
all
just
of this
taking
that
the
we
raw data
see, all
from
of this that's
inside
around
of
us,
the
this
3D
universe
connection
and
space
all of
pilot.
that, he said,
I'm using my
that's
select
what's
chop just to
eternal.
grab the rotation
That
and
is
position
eternal.
XYZ values and just punching
that
those out
cannot
over
be.
OSC. And that's all Touch Design is doing for us.
And do you know
Over
how
in
we know
Notch,
that?
we are now taking in
Because
the OSC modifier
if the universe
for the rotation, running that into
has
an accumulator
always been
for
here.
the rotation
I mean,
section at the
you
top
have guys
here,
that go
I'm using a multiplier
13 billion
of 180,
years ago,
and that's just running
the
into
universe
the rotation values
exploded
of this null,
into being.
controlling our rotation.
Well, wait, if it exploded
A
into
child of that
being,
null
what did it
is
come
the
out
other
of?
null down here, which is going to handle our
Came
position.
out of nothing.
It's set up
right?
this way so that our forwards is
And
always
then
going to be forwards, our
now
left and right
you
is
know
always
what?
going
And
to
the
be
only
left
way
and
you
right
can get
as it's,
something out of nothing
in local
is for
space
an
inside of the
outside
main
force
rotation.
to act upon it
Again,
in
we have an
some
OSC
way.
value running into
God
an
is that
accumulator. Here
outside
I'm using a
force.
multiplier of 8 just so it's nice and fast.
And then they kind of saw the problem with that, and now you have some
the
atheistic guys that are saying, hey, look, you know what, we kind of jumped the gun with this because now they're kind of backing off of the Big Bang a little bit.
Use your camera to move
because
around,
the Big Bang indicates a starting point. So this thing is not eternal. It actually had a starting point.
Probably the 0
you know,
or one
Richard
of your other
Dawkins used to
camera
go back and say,
feeds in
we
here.
can take all of this back
that is
to
how
within
I
a
would use the
millisecond
Space
of when
Pilot
it all
Pro
started.
inside of Notch Builder to get
John
camera
Lennox
control.
said, why did you stop
Hope
there?
everyone's having a fantastic week. And
if you're after truth, why didn't you take that one more step?
Sometimes
said, well,
you gotta push yourself to the limits.
Well, of course, because now, so you know what they did? They've amended it and said, we have now come to the conclusion that in order to produce something out of nothing is a very slow process and happens over a long period of time.
Time is their answer for everything.
So how, yeah. So you have to say to yourself, how does nothing produce that? But I want to get back to this to say, we absolutely know that this has not all been here forever. And how do we know that? Because if the universe has been here forever, listen carefully, if it had no beginning, are you with me? Had no beginning, this day would not have ever arrived. Do you get that? Okay, some of you are looking at me like my pizza was bad or something. So here you are. So look, see, if you're saying it's always been, so here we are right here. Now, let's just put our year date up there, okay? 2023. So here we are, but you can't say it started at 100 billion years ago, because if it's infinite,
Alrighty.
how
so,
far back
g'day
do
everyone.
we need to go?
I just recently
It
picked up a new
never
tablet.
quits going.
G'day
How
everyone.
will you ever
Here's a quick
get to
setup
this
on how
day
I use a 3D
if the
connection
days
space mouse
before
to
it
orbit my
are infinite? You understand what I'm saying? You can't get to today. And it doesn't matter if this is 2023 or 4 billion BC, there's still an infinity that has to take place before that.
So that's their argument for the absence of God, is the same argument for the presence of us.
Okay, yeah, right, for the presence of us, right. What?
When space ends, what's on the other side of it?
Okay, yeah, same thing, right? Right. Okay, so you understand the very fact that you're here means it was finite. It had to have a beginning. And however long ago that was, today is however long that is until now. So it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is the fact that we're at this point now indicates that all of this is not eternal. Those are just interesting to me to think about that. Okay, so got just a couple minutes left here. So we're talking about this divine attribute of God of being eternal and all of that, and that's the background for what Paul is looking at, because he's saying, look, God is the only one that knows. God's the only one that's eternal. God's the one that He gives you life, breath, and all that. In Him we live, move, and have all of these things about God. And so in Revelation 4, when they say, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for Thou hast created all things, and for Thy pleasure they are and were created. And that's the point, that the glory belongs to God alone. And that is why God can be a jealous God. And I want to show you these verses because people get all bothered by this. So let me give you a couple of these verses here. Exodus 20, verse 5, Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them. When they read the Bible. And number two, she overlooks who God is. Is it a sin for God to be jealous? Not in the sense that He means it here, and I'd like to take you through some verses to actually show you this. So this is going to be Isaiah 42:8. I am the Lord. worship of false gods. And God is saying, look, I am jealous over my glory, that I am not going to give it to them. And that is not a sinful thing, especially when you look at what that jealousy is, and we're going to define that in just a second. But before we do, let me show you the one that Paul gives us in 2 Corinthians 11. You know what? I dislike someone because in some way they're superior to me, or somehow I envy them, and that kind of issue. Is that how God really feels about graven images? No, they're not superior to Him. He's not envying anything about them. That's not the meaning of the word here. The meaning of the word is like this. I'm envious of you guys? No. You know what he's saying is, I'm guarding you like a possession here. I'm actually solicitous toward the preservation of your well-being. And who's the only one that really deserves glory? God. And if He gets that glory, and if He says, I'm jealous of that, that's not a sin on His part because it belongs to Him. See, let's suppose Francis has something and Aaron looks at it and he goes, I think I'll just take that. And so she takes it, and then Francis says, hey, I got to get that back. And Bob says, oh, Francis, quit being so jealous. Is she being jealous? No, it's hers. Right? Well, see, when we talk about God being jealous, we're talking about something that belongs to Him. And He's not willing to share it with those graven images. So Paul tells the Corinthians why he's given them this extended reflection of his ministry and Apollos' ministry. So he said, it's for your sakes. It's for your benefit, that you might not think of people above that which is written. And the Corinthians had a real pride issue, which is going to bring me to the last thing about this lesson, and that is, we are really quick to look at certain behaviors and classify them as a sin and make sure that we don't do them. But those less conspicuous things like pride and rebellion and those kind of things, they just kind of go by the wayside. And I hear about this kind of thing all the time. Now, I don't want to mention where this is or who this came from because it's not important. But I do know of a church I'm just trying to think about how to say this, and maybe I should not say it. But let me just say that we often okay, so here's the thing. I know of a church that if you're the preacher and you get up from behind the pulpit, you must be dressed in a very particular way, with high boots up to your knees, with heavy clothing and a coat. And if you do not, you'll go to hell. And that preacher may not carry his Bible with him behind the pulpit. He may only carry a small sermon book that was written by someone else decades ago, and without making eye contact, he must read that to everyone and just read that and let that be it. Because if he brings his Bible up, he's going to hell. And that sounds to me like a church that doesn't understand what it means to be saved or how God is dealing with anyone. But what I'm saying is, now that's an absurd illustration. It's a true one, but that's an absurd illustration to say we get caught up on particular behaviors like they're the issue, and the real issues, folks, are the ones of the heart. And that's why Paul is saying, hey, you don't get to judge this ministry. Only one gets to judge this, and that's the Lord, because He's the one that understands the intents of the heart. He's the one that does this. Okay, so when we come back the next time, We have something that Paul is going to use to actually describe about the life of the apostles back at that time. And I think there's some important things to see there. So let's have a word of prayer and we'll be done for today. Father, thank you for your goodness and grace. And I say that to you all the time, but I really am grateful for that. Long suffering. And thank you for your word that allows us to be able to understand the things that you want to convey to us. And have these things in our minds makes us not only understand things about the Corinthians, but things about the day in which we live as well. We pray, Lord, to take these lessons and to utilize them the way that you intended. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thanks for being here, folks. Have a Merry Christmas. See you on the 9th. Look at that. See you on the 9th of January.
That sounds better than seeing you next year.
It does, doesn't it? Hey, buddy. Love you.